3 days before my military wedding, I found my dress hanging in shreds, bleached white as bone, with a note pinned to what used to be antique lace sleeves. Oops, guess the laundry got mixed up. Hope you have a backup plan, Sergeant. My sister Brooke's handwriting was unmistakable, just like her cruelty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what she didn't know was that our father, FBI agent Marcus Caldwell, had been watching her financial activities for months. By the time my wedding day arrived, she'd learned that some investigations run deeper than family loyalty. The thing about growing up in a federal agent's household is that you learn to read people's tells early. You notice when someone's story doesn't match their body language. You pick up on inconsistencies in timelines. You develop an instinct for when something's wrong, even if you can't quite put your finger on what. I should have trusted those instincts when it came to Brooke. But blood makes you blind sometimes, especially when that blood runs through someone who's supposed to love you. I'm Zara Caldwell, and for 26 years I lived in the shadow of my younger sister's drama. While I was earning my stripes in the Army, mastering logistics coordination and learning to lead soldiers through some of the most complex supply chains imaginable, Brooke was perfecting the art of making every family gathering about her latest crisis. When I got promoted to sergeant, she announced her engagement to a man she'd known for 3 weeks. When I received my deployment orders to Germany, she suddenly developed a mysterious illness that required constant family attention. When I came home with commendation letters and stories of managing million-dollar equipment distributions, she'd somehow managed to lose another job, wreck another relationship, or find herself in another financial predicament that needed Dad's FBI connections to quietly resolve. But none of that prepared me for what she'd do when I announced my engagement to Lieutenant Devon Hayes. Devon and I met during a joint training exercise at Fort Carson. He was Air Force, stationed at Peterson Space Force Base, and I was Army through and through, but somehow we found common ground in our shared love of precision, duty and really terrible mess hall coffee. He had this way of looking at complex problems and breaking them down into manageable pieces, whether it was coordinating air support for ground operations, or figuring out why the supply chain for winter gear kept getting bottlenecked in Kansas. When he proposed during a weekend hiking trip in Garden of the Gods, with the red rock formation stretching toward a Colorado sunset, I knew I'd found my person. The engagement party at our family home in Lakewood was the first sign of trouble. Mom had spent weeks planning it, transforming our backyard into something worthy of a magazine spread, with string lights woven through the cottonwood trees and tables set with her grandmother's china. Dad grilled his famous Kansas City ribs, the ones that usually brought the whole neighborhood over. Devon's parents flew in from Oregon, and my Army friends mixed easily with his Air Force buddies, sharing war stories and comparing notes on the peculiarities of military life. Brooke arrived an hour late, dressed in white. Not cream, not off-white, not champagne, wedding white, a flowing maxi dress with delicate lace details that caught the light every time she moved. When Mom gently suggested she might want to change into something more appropriate for an engagement party, Brooke's eyes went wide with manufactured innocence. Oh, this old thing? I just grabbed it from my closet. I didn't think anyone would mind. It's not like it's Sarah's actual wedding day or anything. She smiled that particular Brooke smile, the one that managed to be sweet and cutting at the same time. Besides, white looks terrible on me. Everyone knows Zara's the one who can pull off the classic bridal look. Devon squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reminder to let it go. He'd heard enough stories about Brooke's attention-seeking behavior to recognize the pattern. But something about the deliberate way she positioned herself in every photo, always managing to be in the center of group shots, always angling so her white dress caught the most light, felt different, more calculated. Dad noticed too. I caught him watching her with that particular expression he got during interrogations. The one where his face remained perfectly neutral while his mind cataloged every inconsistency, every micro-expression, every word choice that didn't quite ring true. Agent Marcus Caldwell had spent 15 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, specializing in cases where family members embezzled from each other, where trust became a weapon, where the people closest to you could cause the most damage. He developed an instinct for sniffing out deception, even when it came wrapped in familiar DNA. After most of the guests had gone home and we were cleaning up the backyard, Dad pulled me aside near the garden shed where Mom kept her prized roses. Zara, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Has Brooke asked you for money recently, or maybe asked about your savings, your military benefits, anything financial? The question caught me off guard. Not direct. She's made a few comments about how lucky I am to have such stable income, and she asked about military housing allowances once. but nothing specific. Why? Dad was quiet for a long moment, watching through the kitchen window as Brooke helped Mom wrap leftover food. Just keep your financial information private for now. Don't discuss wedding expenses. Don't mention your savings account. Don't talk about Devon's military pay or benefits. Can you do that for me? Dad, what's going on? Probably nothing. But in my line of work, you learn to pay attention when someone's lifestyle suddenly improves without an obvious income source to support it. I followed his gaze toward the kitchen. Brooke was wearing a new designer handbag, one I'd noticed earlier but hadn't really thought about. Her manicure looked professionally done, and those weren't drugstore highlights in her hair. For someone who'd been unemployed for 3 months and living rent-free in Mom and Dad's basement, she seemed to be doing remarkably well financially. I'll be careful, I promised, though part of me felt guilty for even having the conversation. This was my sister we were talking about, the same girl who used to braid my hair before school and who cried harder than I did when our golden retriever Bailey died when we were teenagers. But Dad's instincts had kept him alive through 15 years of investigating people who specialized in betraying trust. Maybe it was time I started listening to them. The wedding planning process should have been joyful. Devon and I had decided on a military ceremony at the Broadmoor Resort, with its stunning views of Cheyenne Mountain and enough elegance to satisfy both our mothers' dreams of a picture-perfect wedding. I'd found my dress at a boutique in downtown Colorado Springs, a vintage-inspired gown with delicate lace sleeves and pearl buttons down the back, the kind of dress that felt like it had been waiting specifically for me. Brooke volunteered to help with everything. She offered to coordinate with the florist, to pick up the programs from the printer, to handle the final fitting appointments for the bridesmaids' dresses. At first I was grateful for the help. Planning a military wedding while juggling my duties as a sergeant wasn't exactly a walk in the park, and having family support felt like a blessing. But then small things started going wrong. The florist called 3 days before the wedding to confirm that we'd changed our order from white roses and baby's breath to red carnations and daisy. When I told her we'd made no such change, she insisted that my sister had called with specific instructions, and even provided a credit card number to cover the difference in cost. The program printer had a similar story. According to their records, Brooke had stopped by to make last-minute corrections to the ceremony details, changing Devon's rank from lieutenant to captain and listing my deployment history incorrectly. When I called to fix the errors, they charged me rush fees for the reprint. The bakery that was making our wedding cake had received a call requesting that they change the flavor from classic vanilla with raspberry filling to chocolate with peanut butter, despite the fact that Devon was severely allergic to peanut. When I caught the error during our final tasting, the baker seemed genuinely confused. Your sister seemed so sure you'd changed your minds. She said you'd realized the peanut butter would be more fun for the reception. Each incident could have been explained away as miscommunication or honest mistakes, but taken together they formed a pattern that made my stomach tighten with dread. Someone was deliberately sabotaging my wedding details, and they had enough inside information to make the changes seem legitimate. Devon tried to convince me I was overthinking things. Maybe Brooke's just trying to help and getting mixed up with the detail. You know how she is with attention to detail, but I knew Brooke better than anyone. She might have been dramatic and self-centered, but she wasn't disorganized. When she wanted something to go right, she was meticulous to the point of obsession. The fact that every single mistake happened to make my wedding more chaotic, more stressful, more likely to go wrong, didn't feel like coincidence. The final straw came 2 days before the ceremony, when I went to the bridal shop for my last fitting, and found that someone had accidentally provided them with measurements that were 2 sizes too small. The seamstress had already begun alterations based on the incorrect numbers, taking in the bodice so dramatically that I could barely breathe when I tried the dress on. "I'm so sorry," the seamstress apologized, pins still in her mouth as she tried to figure out how to fix the damage. "Your sister was so specific about the measurements when she called. She said you'd been working out intensively and had lost significant weight." That night, I called Tessa Moreau, my best friend from basic training and the person I'd chosen as my maid of honor. Tessa had the kind of no-nonsense personality that came from growing up as the oldest of 6 kids in a military family. She'd seen enough family drama to recognize the signs of deliberate sabotage. "Zara, this isn't a series of innocent mistakes. Someone is actively trying to ruin your wedding, and you know exactly who it is. But why would Brooke do this? What does she gain from making my wedding a disaster? The same thing she gains from every crisis she creates. Attention, control, the satisfaction of knowing she can manipulate your most important day and get away with it." Tessa was right, but admitting it felt like accepting that my own sister hated me enough to destroy something that meant everything to me. The girl who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms, who cheered louder than anyone when I graduated from basic training, who cried when I left for my first deployment, had turned into someone I barely recognized. The next morning I moved my dress to Tessa's apartment off base for safekeeping. If Brooke was planning something bigger for the actual wedding day, at least my dress would be secure. Tessa lived in a small complex near downtown Colorado Springs, the kind of place where military families could afford rent on enlisted pay. Her apartment was tiny but immaculate, with photos from our deployments covering one wall and a small American flag in the window. "We'll get the dress fixed," Tessa assured me as we hung it carefully in her bedroom closet. "My neighbor's a seamstress, and she owes me a favor after I helped her move last month. She can let it out tonight and have it ready for tomorrow." I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders for the first time in days. At least one thing would go right. My dress would fit. Tessa would make sure I got to the ceremony on time, and in less than 24 hours I'd be married to the man I loved despite my sister's best efforts to turn the day into chaos. That was before I found the note. I drove back to my parents' house that evening to pick up my shoes and jewelry, planning to stay the night at Tessa's place to avoid any last-minute wedding morning drama. The house was quiet when I arrived, with Mom and Dad both at their respective book clubs and Brooke supposedly out with friends. I used my key to let myself in.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Heading straight upstairs to my old bedroom where I'd left my wedding accessories in a carefully organized box. The box was exactly where I'd left it, sitting on my childhood desk next to my high school yearbooks and a framed photo of me in my dress uniform. But something felt wrong the moment I opened it. The jewelry was still there, but the small satin bag that held my grandmother's pearl earrings was sitting on top instead of nestled safely at the bottom where I'd placed it. The shoes were still in their box, but the tissue paper had been replaced and folded differently. Someone had been through my things. I was still processing this realization when I heard a car door slam outside. Through my bedroom window I could see Brooke getting out of her car, her arms full of shopping bags from expensive stores I knew she couldn't afford. She moved with purpose toward the house, and something about her body language made me instinctively step back from the window. I heard the front door open and close, followed by footsteps on the stairs. Instead of going to her own room, the footsteps stopped outside mine. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, hardly breathing as I listened. The door creaked open slowly. Through the crack between the hinges I could see Brooke enter the room, her eyes immediately going to the desk where my wedding box sat open. She moved toward it with the kind of careful precision that suggested she'd done this before, her hands reaching for something specific. That's when I saw what she was really after. Hidden beneath the tissue paper in my shoebox was a small manila envelope I'd forgotten about, containing the cash gifts from my engagement party. Nearly $800 that various relatives and family friends had pressed into my hands throughout the evening. Money I'd meant to deposit but had been too busy with wedding planning to get to the bank. Brooke's hand closed around the envelope with practiced ease. This wasn't her first time going through my things. I stepped out from behind the door, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest, looking for something. Brooke spun around, the envelope still clutched in her hand, her face cycling through expressions of surprise, guilt, and finally defiance. "Zara, I didn't know you were here. I was just what? Just stealing my engagement money. Just going through my personal belongings in my own bedroom." Her mouth opened and closed without sound for a moment before her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Gone was any pretense of sisterly affection, or innocent mistake. What looked back at me was cold calculation. "You have so much," she said finally, her voice flat. "The perfect military career, the perfect fiancé, the perfect wedding that everyone keeps talking about. Mom and Dad are so proud of Sergeant Zara and her big fancy ceremony. Do you know what it's like to live in the shadow of someone who does everything right? So you decided to steal from me, to sabotage my wedding because you're jealous? I decided to take what I needed. You'll never miss $800. Your military pay is steady. Devin has money, and you know Mom and Dad will cover anything you can't afford. Some of us don't have that luxury." The envelope was still in her hand, and she made no move to give it back. If anything, she seemed to be calculating whether she could push past me and make it out of the room with the money. "Put it back, Brooke. Or what? You'll tell Mom and Dad? You'll make me look like the bad guy again? Poor Saint Zara being victimized by her terrible sister. Or I'll call the police and report theft from a military service member, which happens to be a federal crime." That got her attention. For the first time since I'd caught her, uncertainty flickered across her face. "You wouldn't try me." We stared at each other for a long moment, the air between us charged with years of accumulated resentment and sibling rivalry that had finally boiled over into something ugly and irreparable. Then Brooke smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made ice form in my veins. "Fine. Take your precious money." She tossed the envelope onto the bed, where it landed with a soft thud. "But don't think this is over, Zara. Tomorrow is your big day, and I've put a lot of work into making sure it's memorable. She brushed past me toward the door, pausing only to look back over her shoulder. Sweet dreams, big sister. After she left, I sat on my childhood bed, holding the envelope and trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't sibling rivalry anymore. This was something darker, more deliberate. Brooke hadn't just been causing chaos out of jealousy or attention-seeking behavior. She'd been planning something, building towards something, and tomorrow was apparently when it would all come together. I called Dad's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. His book club meetings sometimes ran late, especially when they were discussing true crime novels, which seemed to be his favorite genre these days. I tried Mom next, with the same result. Finally, I called Tess. "I'm coming to get you right now," she said after I explained what had happened. "Pack whatever you need for tonight and tomorrow morning. You're not staying in that house." "Tessa, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe." "Zara, listen to me. I've seen what family sabotage looks like, and this isn't someone acting out of jealousy. This is someone with a plan. Tomorrow is your wedding day, and you're going to be surrounded by hundreds of people, including your entire chain of command. Whatever Brooke is planning, it's designed to cause maximum damage to your reputation and your career." The weight of that possibility hit me like a physical blow. My military career wasn't just a job, it was my identity, my future, my path to financial security and personal fulfillment. If Brooke managed to cause a scene that reflected poorly on my judgment or professionalism, it could affect everything from my security clearance to my promotion potential. I packed quickly, grabbing only the essentials for the next 2 days. As I was about to leave, something made me go back to check on my wedding dress one more time. But when I opened the closet where I'd hung it that morning, the space was empty except for a few wire hangers and the faint smell of bleach. My dress was gone. For a moment, I stood frozen, staring at the empty closet as if the dress might somehow reappear through sheer force of will. Then reality hit me like a physical blow, and I ran through the house calling Brooke's name. Her room was empty, her car no longer in the driveway. She'd taken my dress and disappeared. I called Tessa with shaking hands, barely able to get the words out. "She took it. She took my wedding dress. Stay right there. I'm coming to get you and then we're going to figure this out." But even as Tessa's calm voice tried to reassure me, I knew that figuring it out might be too late. My wedding was in 18 hours, and my dress was in the hands of someone who'd already proven she was willing to destroy anything that meant something to me. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic phone calls and desperate planning. Tessa arrived within minutes, taking one look at my face and immediately switching into crisis management mode. We called every bridal shop within a 100-mile radius, looking for anything in my size that could work for a military wedding. Most were closed, and the few that answered explained that finding a wedding dress on less than 24 hours' notice was essentially impossible. Mom and Dad returned home around 10:30 to find me sitting at their kitchen table with Tessa, surrounded by bridal magazines and printouts from online dress shops, trying to find a miracle solution that didn't exist. "What's wrong?" Mom asked, immediately picking up on the tension in the room. When I explained what had happened, her face went through the same cycle of emotions I'd experienced: disbelief, denial, and finally a kind of horrified acceptance. "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding," she said weakly. "Maybe Brooke moved the dress to protect it. Or maybe she took it to get it steamed." Dad was already pulling out his phone. "What's Brooke's current location?" he asked, his voice taking on the professional tone he used during investigations. "I don't know. She left right after I caught her with the money." "Find my iPhone," he muttered, pulling up the family tracking app. His face darkened as he stared at the screen. "Her phone's been turned off since 7:30 this evening." The three of us sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. You don't turn off your phone and disappear unless you're planning something you don't want to be tracked for.
"Dad," I said carefully, "you asked me about Brooke's financial situation a few weeks ago. What exactly have you been noticing?" Agent Marcus Caldwell looked at his wife, then back at me, clearly weighing how much he should reveal. 3 months ago, I started getting alerts from the fraud monitoring system at the Bureau. Someone had been making inquiries about your financial accounts, your military benefits, even your security clearance status. The inquiries were subtle, scattered across different agencies and departments, but they formed a pattern. My blood ran cold. What kind of inquiry? The kind someone would make if they were planning to either impersonate you for financial gain or damage your reputation badly enough to affect your military standing. I've been quietly investigating, but I needed more evidence before I could take official action. You think Brooke's been planning this for months? I think Brooke has been planning something for months, and your wedding was just the perfect opportunity to execute it. A public event with your entire military community in attendance,
maximum visibility for whatever damage she intended to cause. Tessa had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. Agent Caldwell, with all due respect, we need to focus on tomorrow. Zara needs a dress, and we need a plan for protecting her reputation no matter what Brooke tries to pull. Dad nodded grimly. You're right. Marcus the father needs to step back and let Agent Caldwell handle this professionally. He stood up and walked to his home office, returning with a small digital recorder and a manila folder. First, we document everything that's happened, every incident of sabotage, every suspicious financial activity, every threat or intimidation. If this goes public tomorrow, we need a clear record that shows a pattern of deliberate harassment and criminal behavior. For the next 2 hours, we methodically went through every detail of the past few months. Dad recorded my statement about finding Brooke with the money and her threat about making my wedding memorable. He photographed the empty closet where my dress had been, the disturbed items in my wedding box, even the note Brooke had left about the laundry mix-up. Mom sat quietly through most of it, occasionally wiping tears from her eyes as the scope of Brooke's betrayal became clear. I don't understand how I missed this, she whispered. How did I not see that she was capable of this kind of cruelty? Because she's your daughter, Dad replied gently. And because people who commit crimes against family members are often the most skilled at maintaining emotional manipulation. She's been playing the victim for so long that everyone accepted it as her identity. By the time we finished documenting everything, it was nearly 2 in the morning. My wedding was in 10 hours, and I still had no dress and no idea what Brooke was planning for an encore performance. That's when Tessa had an idea that changed everything. Zara, what if we turn this around on her? What if instead of trying to hide what she's done, we make it part of your wedding story? What do you mean? I mean we get married in your dress blues, full military ceremony, complete with honor guard and ceremonial swords. Make it clear that this wedding isn't about the dress or the perfect Pinterest photos. It's about 2 service members making a commitment to each other and to something bigger than themselves. The idea was so simple and so perfect that I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it myself. My dress blues were hanging safely in my apartment on base, along with all my military decorations and ceremonial accessories. They represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd earned, everything that Brooke couldn't steal or sabotage. Devin will love it, I realized. He's been saying all along that the military ceremony was the most important part to him. Dad smiled for the first time all evening. And if Brooke shows up tomorrow planning to cause a scene, she'll find herself facing a bride who's clearly in control of her own narrative, surrounded by fellow service members who don't tolerate attacks on their own. But what about the dress, Mom? What if she shows up with it, trying to humiliate you publicly? That's when Dad's expression turned cold and professional. Then she'll find herself under arrest for theft of military property, since Zara used her military clothing allowance to purchase that dress. The FBI has been building a case against her for months, and public destruction of stolen property would be the final piece of evidence we need. You've been building a case against her. Brooke has been committing multiple federal crimes, including identity theft, fraud, and harassment of a military service member. I've been documenting everything while trying to find a way to handle it within the family, but she's escalated beyond what can be resolved privately. I stared at my father, seeing him clearly for the first time as both the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and the federal agent who'd spent 15 years hunting down people who betrayed trust for personal gain. What happens to her? That depends on what she does tomorrow. If she returns your property and stops the harassment, we might be able to work out a deal that involves restitution and counseling instead of federal charges. If she escalates, he didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood the stakes. As Tessa and I finally headed to her apartment to get a few hours of sleep before my wedding day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: control. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I wasn't reacting to Brooke's chaos. I was taking charge of my own story. My wedding dress might be gone, but I was still going to have the wedding of my dreams. And if my sister wanted to crash the party, she'd find herself facing not just a bride who refused to be victimized, but an FBI investigation that had been waiting months for her to finally cross the line. Tomorrow would be my wedding day, one way or another, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to stop protecting Brooke from the consequences of her own choices. I woke up at 0500 hours on my wedding day, not because I'd set an alarm, but because my body had been conditioned by years of military life to rise before dawn. For a moment, lying in Tessa's spare bedroom with unfamiliar shadows on the ceiling, I forgot about everything that had happened. Then reality crashed back like cold water, and I remembered that somewhere in Colorado Springs, my sister had my wedding dress and a plan to destroy the most important day of my life. Tessa was already awake in the kitchen,
dressed in her PT uniform and making coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She took one look at my face and handed me a steaming mug without a word. We'd been through enough deployments together to communicate without speaking, and right now her silence said everything I needed to hear. We were going to get through this day, and we were going to do it with military precision. Your dress blues are hanging in the bathroom, she said finally. I picked them up from your apartment at 0430. Everything's there, including your dress sword and all your I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness but from gratitude. While I'd been spiraling about my missing wedding dress, Tessa had been solving problems. She'd driven across town in the pre-dawn darkness to collect everything I needed to get married in uniform, because that's what battle buddies do for each other. Tessa, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to. Just promise me that when we're both old and gray, you'll remember that your real wedding dress was the one that represented who you actually are, not some fancy gown that could be stolen by a jealous sister. She was right, of course. The dress hanging in my parents' closet had been beautiful, but it was just fabric and lace. My dress blues represented years of service, sacrifice, and achievement. They carried the weight of every challenge I'd overcome, every soldier I'd led, every mission I'd completed successfully. If I was going to make vows to spend my life with Devon, there was something powerful about doing it while wearing the uniform that represented my truest self. My phone buzzed with a text from Devon. Good morning, beautiful. Ready to become Mrs. Hayes in 6 hours. I love you more than yesterday but less than tomorrow. The message made me smile despite everything. Devon had been sending me variations of that same text every morning for the past year, and somehow it never got old. I typed back quickly. Ready to marry my best friend and favorite Air Force officer. See you at the altar, Lieutenant. Within seconds he responded, Hoo-ah, Sergeant, let's do this thing. That exchange reminded me why we were getting married in the first place. Not for the perfect photos or the designer dress, or the approval of extended family members who barely knew us. We were getting married because we'd found someone who understood the demands of military life, who shared our values of service and sacrifice, and who could make us laugh even in the middle of deployment stress. Brooke could steal my dress, sabotage my vendors, and try to turn my wedding into a 3-ring circus, but she couldn't touch what really mattered. The next few hours passed in a carefully orchestrated routine that felt more like mission preparation than traditional bridal beauty treatment. Tessa had called in reinforcements in the form of Carmen Rodriguez and Ashley Park, 2 fellow soldiers who'd served with us in Germany. They arrived at 0700 with military-grade efficiency, armed with professional quality makeup supplies and enough coffee to fuel an entire battalion. Carmen was a combat medic who'd learned to do makeup artistry during her off-duty hours, practicing on fellow soldiers who wanted to look good for rare nights out or video calls home to family. She had steady hands from years of treating battlefield injuries, and an eye for detail that came from dealing with life or death situations where precision mattered. We're going for classic elegance, she announced, spreading her supplies across Tessa's kitchen table, with the same methodical approach she used for medical equipment. Something that looks natural enough for a military ceremony but polished enough for wedding photos. Think Michelle Obama meets Wonder Woman. Ashley, a communications specialist with a talent for hairstyling, had brought enough bobby pins and hairspray to construct a fortress. She studied my face and hair texture with the same analytical approach she used for troubleshooting radio equipment. We're doing a low chignon, she decided. Something that'll look sharp under your service cap but elegant enough to show off your grandmother's pearl earrings. Classic military bearing with just enough softness to remind everyone you're also a bride. As they worked, transforming me from a sleep-deprived woman in PT gear into someone who looked ready to command respect and exchange vows, we talked about everything except the elephant in the room. We discussed Ashley's recent promotion, Carmen's upcoming deployment to South Korea, and Tessa's plans to apply for officer candidate school. Normal military conversations about career progression, training schedules, and the peculiarities of life in the service. It felt like armor, this normal chatter among women who understood each other's world completely. Whatever chaos Brooke was planning to unleash, I'd be facing it surrounded by people who'd literally had my back in combat zones. A family wedding drama suddenly seemed manageable by comparison. Around 0900, my phone rang, Dad's name appeared on the screen, and I answered on speaker so the others could hear. Zara, I need to give you an update. Brooke's phone came back online about an hour ago, and her location shows she's at the Broadmoor. She checked into a room sometime after midnight. My stomach clenched. The Broadmoor was our wedding venue. She was already there, already in position for whatever she had planned. Has she made contact with anyone at the hotel? The wedding coordinator, the catering staff, I'm looking into that now. But Zara, there's something else. Hotel security footage from early this morning shows her entering the building with several large bags and what appears to be fabric or clothing items. The room went silent except for the quiet whir of Ashley's curling iron. We all understood the implication. Brooke wasn't just at my wedding venue. She brought supplies for whatever performance she was planning. Dad, what are my options here? Can hotel security remove her? Not unless she actually commits a crime or violates hotel policy. As far as they're concerned, she's a paying guest who has every right to be there. But I've spoken with Colonel Webb, and she's arranging for additional military police presence at the ceremony. If Brooke tries anything that disrupts a military function, they'll handle it swiftly and professionally. Colonel Patricia Webb was my commanding officer, a no-nonsense woman who'd come up through the ranks during an era when female soldiers had to prove themselves twice as hard as their male counterpart. She understood better than anyone how damaging it could be for a soldier's career to have family drama play out in front of military leadership. Sir, did you explain the situation to Colonel Webb? Only the relevant detail. That you're dealing with a family member who's been engaging in harassment, and that there might be an attempt to disrupt your ceremony. She doesn't need to know all the personal specifics to understand that this is a threat to good order and discipline. That was Dad speaking like the FBI agent he was, understanding instinctively how to frame the situation in terms that military leadership would take seriously. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or wedding drama, it was a potential threat to military protocol and the professional reputation of one of their soldiers. Thank you, Dad. I'll see you at the hotel in 2 hours. After I hung up, Carmen paused in her makeup application to look me directly in the eyes. Zara, I need you to listen to me. Whatever your sister is planning, remember that you've got an entire community of warriors who have your back. We've seen you lead soldiers through supply missions in hostile territory. We've watched you coordinate logistics for operations that kept thousands of people safe and fed. One unstable civilian with a grudge is not going to take you down. Ashley nodded emphatically. Plus, you're going to look absolutely badass in your dress blues. If she wants to cause a scene, she'll be doing it in front of a bride who looks like she could run the Pentagon and then go home to cook dinner. Their confidence was infectious. For the first time since finding my empty closet, I felt like myself again. Not a victim of family betrayal, not a bride whose perfect day had been ruined, but Sergeant Zara Caldwell, a woman who'd earned her rank through competence, dedication and the ability to handle whatever challenges came her way. By 1,000 hours I was ready. My dress blues fit perfectly, the creases sharp enough to cut glass and every ribbon and decoration precisely positioned according to military regulations. My hair was styled in a way that looked both professional and elegant, and Carmen's makeup enhanced my features without looking overdone. I looked like exactly what I was, a soldier preparing for the most important mission of her personal life. We loaded into Tessa's car for the drive to the Broadmoor, a convoy of military women armed with backup makeup, emergency sewing kits, and enough determination to handle whatever crisis awaited us. As we pulled into the hotel's circular drive, I caught my breath at the sight of the ground. The Broadmoor looked like something from a fairy tale, all red-roofed elegance nestled against the backdrop of Cheyenne Mountain. The September afternoon was perfect Colorado weather, with clear blue skies and aspen trees just beginning to show hints of gold. Gardens bloomed with late-season flowers, and the lake reflected the mountains like a mirror. It was exactly the setting I'd dreamed of for my wedding, and for a moment I let myself feel the excitement I'd been suppressing under layers of stress and anxiety. In 3 hours I was going to marry Devon in this beautiful place, surrounded by people who loved and supported us. Whatever Brooke had planned couldn't change that fundamental fact. Carmen Valdez, our wedding coordinator, met us at the hotel entrance, with the kind of professional smile that suggested she'd dealt with family drama before. She was a small woman with iron gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to managing large events under pressure. Sergeant Caldwell, you look absolutely stunning. The uniform choice is inspired, and it's going to photograph beautifully against the mountain backdrop. Thank you, Carmen. Has there been any unusual activity this morning? Any changes to our arrangements? Her smile flickered slightly. There was one incident around a young woman claiming to be your sister, attempted to access the bridal suite, saying she had your wedding dress and needed to deliver it personally. Security prevented access since she wasn't on our authorized list, but she became quite agitated when they wouldn't let her upstairs. My heart rate picked up. Is she still in the hotel? She has a room reservation, so we can't remove her from the property. But I've instructed all staff that any changes to your wedding arrangements must be approved directly by you or your designated representatives. She gestured to Tessa, Ashley, and Carmen. These are your people, correct? Absolute. If anyone else claims to represent me or tries to make changes, Please contact hotel security immediately. Understood. Now shall we go upstairs and get you settled? Your other bridesmaids are already in the suite, and your photographer should be arriving within the hour. The bridal suite was everything I'd hoped for. A spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the lake, elegant furniture arranged for getting ready photos, and enough space for my entire wedding party to prepare comfortably. My other bridesmaids, Devon's sister Rachel and my cousin Jennifer, were already there with mimosas and excited chatter about the ceremony. "Zara, you look incredible," Rachel exclaimed, immediately understanding that the uniform change was intentional rather than a crisis response. "Devon is going to lose his mind when he sees you. This is so much more meaningful than a traditional dress." Jennifer, who'd served as a Navy corpsman before getting out to start a family, nodded approvingly. "This is perfect. You look like the warrior you are, but also like a woman in love. It's the best of both worlds." As the photographer began capturing getting ready shots, I felt some of the tension leave my shoulder. This was what I'd wanted all along, to be surrounded by women who understood and supported me, preparing for a ceremony that celebrated not just my relationship with Devon, but also the life and career I built through my own efforts. The photos were going to be beautiful. Instead of the typical shots of bridesmaids in matching robes, helping a bride into an elaborate gown, these images showed military women in various stages of preparation, some in uniform and others in elegant dresses, all working together with professional efficiency and genuine affection. Around noon, room service arrived with lunch, elegant sandwiches, fresh fruit, and sparkling water to keep us hydrated without risking any makeup mishaps. We were just settling down to eat when there was a sharp knock at the door. Carmen Valdez entered looking apologetic but determined. "Sergeant Caldwell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation downstairs that requires your attention. The young woman from this morning is in the lobby with what she claims is your wedding dress, and she's demanding to speak with you personally." Through the suite's windows, I could see wedding guests beginning to arrive for the 1500 ceremony. Devon's Air Force colleagues were easy to spot in their dress blues, mingling with my Army friends and various family members. Everything looked perfect and peaceful from up here, but I knew that downstairs, Brooke was preparing to detonate whatever explosive device she'd been building for months. "What exactly is she doing?" Tessa asked, immediately shifting into protective mode. "She's set up what appears to be a display in the lobby seating area. The dress is laid out across several chairs, and she's telling anyone who will listen that her sister is getting married in a few hours, and she wants to surprise her with the dress she thought was lost." My blood ran cold. Brooke wasn't planning to hide or sneak around. She was staging a very public performance, positioning herself as the devoted sister saving the day with the missing dress. Anyone who didn't know the full story would see her as heroic rather than manipulative. "Carmen, I need to see exactly what she's doing. Is there a way to observe the lobby without being seen? The mezzanine level has a clear view of the main floor, and there's a service corridor that'll get you there without using the main stairs." Ashley immediately stood up. "I'm coming with you." "We all are," Tessa added firmly. "If she's putting on a show, she needs to see that you're not facing this alone." 5 minutes later, we were positioned on the mezzanine level, looking down at a scene that made my stomach turn. Brooke had indeed created a display, but it wasn't what Carmen had described. My wedding dress was spread across 3 chairs, but it was no longer white. Large sections had been bleached to a harsh chemical white that looked nothing like the original ivory lace. Other sections appeared to have been cut and roughly sewn back together, creating a patchwork effect that looked deliberate rather than accidental. Worse, Brooke had positioned herself next to the display with a tablet, showing what appeared to be photos and documents to anyone who approached. From our vantage point, I could see wedding guests gathering around her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "She's not trying to save your wedding," Ashley observed grimly. "She's trying to control the narrative about why you're not wearing a traditional dress." Carmen was right. This wasn't sabotage, it was psychological warfare. Brooke was positioning herself as the victim of an ungrateful sister who'd rejected her attempts to help, while simultaneously ensuring that everyone at my wedding would know that my original dress had been destroyed. "I need to get down there," I said, but Tessa caught my arm. "No. You need to let your father handle this. The moment you engage with her directly, you become part of her drama. Right now, you're the composed military professional getting ready for your wedding. Don't let her drag you down to her level." As if summoned by our conversation, Dad appeared in the lobby below. He was dressed in his best suit, looking every inch the distinguished federal agent and father of the bride. His approach Brooke was calm and measured, and even from a distance we could see her body language change as he spoke to her. Whatever he said was brief and quiet, but the effect was immediate. Brooke's animated storytelling stopped, and she began gathering up the destroyed dress. The small crowd that had assembled around her gradually dispersed, sensing that whatever drama they'd been witnessing was coming to an end. Within minutes, hotel security appeared with a luggage cart. The destroyed dress was loaded up and wheeled away, and Brooke followed, her earlier confidence replaced by something that looked like defeat. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Situation handled. She's leaving the hotel voluntarily. Focus on your wedding. I love you. Carmen Valdez appeared beside us, having climbed the service stairs to provide an update. Your father explained to her that she had two choices: leave quietly and immediately, or be escorted by security and face charges for disturbing the peace at a private event. She chose to leave. What about the dress? What did she tell people? From what I overheard, she was claiming that you'd asked her to bring your backup dress but that there had been an accident with the cleaning process. Most people seemed confused rather than concerned. Your father's intervention prevented her from elaborating on whatever story she was trying to sell. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I had to sit down for a moment. It was over. Whatever Brooke had been planning, whatever climactic scene she'd envisioned for my wedding day, Dad had shut it down with the quiet authority that came from 15 years of dealing with people who thought they were smarter than federal law enforcement. Ladies, I said to my wedding party, I think it's time to finish getting ready. I have a wedding to attend. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of final preparations and growing excitement. With the Brooke crisis resolved, I could finally focus on what this day was actually about: marrying the man I loved in front of people who cared about both of us. My makeup was touched up, my hair was secured with enough bobby pins to survive a Category 5 hurricane, and my dress blues were inspected one final time to ensure every detail met military standard. The photographer captured dozens of images, me adjusting my ribbons in the mirror, the wedding party helping each other with final details, quiet moments of reflection as I prepared to take the biggest step of my life. At 14:30, Carmen knocked on the door for the final time. Sergeant Caldwell, it's time. As we prepared to head downstairs for the ceremony, I took one last look around the bridal suite. In a few hours I'd be back here as a married woman, officially Mrs. Zara Hayes but still Sergeant Caldwell to my soldiers and fellow service members. The dual identity felt right in a way that spending the day worrying about a stolen dress never had. Ready? Tessa asked, adjusting her own dress uniform one final time. Ready? I replied, and for the first time in months, I meant it completely. The ceremony was being held in the hotel's outdoor pavilion, with the Rocky Mountains providing a backdrop that no church or indoor venue could match. As we made our way through the hotel corridors toward the ceremony site, I could hear the gentle murmur of assembled guests and the string quartet playing classical music. When we reached the staging area behind the pavilion, I caught my first glimpse of the assembled crowd, and my breath caught in my throat. Nearly 200 people had come to celebrate with us, military colleagues from multiple branches and bases, family members from across the country, friends from high school and college, in the tight-knit community of military spouses and families who understood the unique challenges and rewards of service life. Devon was already at the altar with his groomsmen, all of them in dress blues that created a striking visual against the mountain landscape. Even from a distance I could see his face light up as he spotted me preparing to walk down the aisle. Colonel Webb appeared beside me, looking resplendent in her dress uniform with enough ribbons and decorations to tell the story of a distinguished military career. She'd volunteered to escort me down the aisle in place of Dad, who would be performing his father of the bride duties from his seat in the front row. Sergeant Caldwell, you look outstanding. Are you ready to show this crowd what a real military wedding looks like? Yes, ma'am. Thank you for doing this. It's my honor. You're one of the finest soldiers I've had the privilege to command, and Lieutenant Hayes is getting a hell of a partner. The music changed to the traditional wedding march, and suddenly it was Colonel Webb offered me her arm with military precision, and we stepped out from behind the pavilion into the late afternoon sunshine. The next few minutes felt like something from a dream. Every face in the assembled crowd was turned toward us, and every expression reflected joy, love, and respect. These weren't people who'd come out of obligation or social expectation. They were people who genuinely cared about Devon and me and wanted to witness us making this commitment to each other. As we walked down the aisle, I could see Dad in the front row, his earlier stern FBI agent expression replaced by pure paternal pride. Mom was beside him, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter get married in the uniform that represented everything I'd worked to achieve. But it was Devon's face that held my attention as we approached the altar. He was looking at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and his expression held all the love, respect, and partnership that had brought us to this moment. When Colonel Webb placed my hand in Devon's, she whispered just loud enough for us both to hear, "Take care of each other, and serve with honor." "We will, ma'am," Devon replied, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eye. The chaplain began the ceremony with words about service, sacrifice, and the unique bond between two people who'd chosen to dedicate their lives to something greater than themselves. As he spoke about the challenges and rewards of military marriage, I felt a profound sense of rightness about everything that had led to this moment. When it came time for vows, Devon went first, his voice clear and strong as he promised to support my military career, to stand by me through deployments and relocations, and to love me not despite my strength and independence but because of them. My own vows focused on partnership, respect, and the shared values that had drawn us together in the first place. I promised to be his teammate in all things, to support his own military aspirations, and to build a life together that honored both our individual service and our commitment to each other. The ring exchange was performed with military precision, both of us handling the small ceremony with the same attention to detail we brought to our professional duties. When the chaplain finally pronounced us husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers that echoed off the surrounding mountain. Devon's kiss was everything a first married kiss should be: tender, passionate, and full of promise for the future we were going to build together. As we broke apart, he whispered in my ear, "I love you, Mrs. "I love you too, Lieutenant Hayes," I whispered back, using his rank the way military couples do when they want to remind each other that they're partners in service as well as in life. The recessional was accompanied by the traditional Arch of Sabers, with Devon's Air Force colleagues and my Army friends creating a ceremonial pathway for us to walk through as newly married partners. Each saber was raised in perfect synchronization, creating a visual reminder that we were surrounded by a community that understood and supported our choice to combine military service with married life. As we walked through the arch and toward the reception area, I caught a glimpse of someone familiar in the crowd. Brooke was standing at the edge of the hotel grounds, just far enough away to avoid trespassing but close enough to observe the ceremony. She was no longer wearing the designer outfit from earlier. Instead, she looked disheveled and defeated, like someone who'd finally realized that her months of planning and sabotage had accomplished nothing except to reveal her own character. For a moment our eyes met across the distance. I felt a flicker of the old instinct to reach out, to try to bridge the gap between us, to see if there was still some way to salvage our relationship. Then Devon squeezed my hand, drawing my attention back to the celebration surrounding us, and I realized that some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. I'd spent too many years trying to manage Brooke's emotions, trying to minimize her drama, trying to be the bigger person in conflicts I hadn't started. Today was about moving forward, not looking back at relationships that had become toxic despite my best efforts to preserve them. The reception was everything I'd hoped for: elegant without being stuffy, festive without being chaotic, and filled with people who genuinely wanted to celebrate our marriage. Military traditions mixed seamlessly with family customs, creating an atmosphere that felt both formal and joyful. During the dinner portion, Dad stood to give the father of the bride toast. His words were carefully chosen, focusing on my character, my achievements, and the bright future Devon and I were building together. He made no mention of the morning's drama, or the months of investigation that had led to this day. Instead, he spoke like a proud father whose daughter had found her perfect partner. "Zara has always been someone who faces challenges head-on, and comes out stronger on the other side," he said, raising his glass toward our table. "Devon, you're getting a woman who will stand by you through anything, who will challenge you to be your best self, and who will never let you settle for less than you deserve. And Zara, you're getting a partner who sees your strength as an asset, not a threat, and who will support your dreams even when they take you far from home." The toast brought tears to my eyes, not just because of Dad's words but because of everything they represent. This was what family was supposed to look like: people who supported your growth, who celebrated your achievements, and who had your back when others tried to tear you down. As the evening progressed and we moved into dancing and celebration, I felt a profound sense of completion. The wedding I'd envisioned for months had been threatened by someone who should have been my biggest supporter, but it had been saved by people who understood what really mattered. My dress blues would appear in every wedding photo, a visual reminder that I'd married Devon not as someone trying to be perfect for one day, but as exactly who I was: a soldier, a leader, and a woman who'd learned to value substance over appearance. When Devon and I finally made it back to the bridal suite late that evening, exhausted but exhilarated, I found a small envelope that had been slipped under the door. For a moment my heart rate spiked as I worried that Brooke had managed one final intrusion into my wedding day. Instead, the envelope contained a note from Colonel Webb: "Sergeant Caldwell, Today you demonstrated the same grace under pressure that makes you an outstanding soldier. Your wedding was a credit to the uniform and a beautiful celebration of military value. Congratulations to you and Lieutenant Hayes. I showed the note to Devon, who smiled as he read it. You know what this means, don't you? What? It means that even your commanding officer recognizes that you handled today like the professional you are. Whatever your sister was trying to accomplish, she failed completely. As I got ready for bed, still wearing my wedding ring and feeling like the luckiest woman in the world, I realized that Devon was right. Brooke's campaign of sabotage had ultimately accomplished nothing except to highlight the strength of the community surrounding us. My wedding day hadn't been ruined, it had been refined, stripped down to what actually mattered and built back up with military precision and genuine love. The dress she'd stolen and destroyed had been replaced by something that represented my true identity. The chaos she'd tried to create had been neutralized by people who refused to let drama overshadow celebration. Tomorrow Devon and I would begin our married life with a story that no one else would ever have. The military wedding that survived family sabotage and came out stronger on the other side. And Brooke would have to live with the knowledge that her months of planning had accomplished nothing except to ensure that she'd never be welcome at another family celebration. As I drifted off to sleep in my new husband's arms, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete. The battle was over, and I'd won not by stooping to Brooke's level, but by refusing to let her chaos define my most important day. Justice, as it turned out, sometimes looked like a perfect wedding surrounded by people who genuinely loved you, while your saboteur stood alone on the sidelines, watching the happiness she'd tried to destroy flourish despite her best effort. Devon and I returned from our honeymoon in Hawaii, exactly 10 days later, sun-kissed and blissfully unaware that the FBI investigation into Brooke's activities had accelerated dramatically in our absence. We'd spent a week disconnected from phones, emails and family drama, snorkeling in crystal-clear waters and hiking volcanic trails while learning to be married to each other. The Pacific Ocean had washed away the last residual stress from our wedding day chaos, leaving us relaxed and genuinely happy. That peaceful bubble burst the moment we walked into our new apartment on base and found 17 missed calls from Dad, 12 from Mom, and a thick manila envelope marked urgent federal investigation wedged between our door and the frame. Devon picked up the envelope while I scrolled through the voicemail messages, each one more frantic than the last. Dad's voice became progressively more strained as the days went on. Zara, call me immediately when you get this. There have been developments. Then Zara, this is urgent. Brooke's situation has escalated beyond family issues. Finally, honey, I need you to contact me the moment you're back in the country. There are federal charges pending. I sank onto our new couch, still wearing the lei Devon had placed around my neck at the Honolulu airport, and felt the weight of reality settling back onto my shoulders. 10 days ago I'd thought Brooke's wedding sabotage was the culmination of her jealousy and attention-seeking behavior. Apparently I'd been wrong. Devon opened the envelope and spread its contents across our coffee table with the same methodical approach he used for mission briefing. Inside were bank statements, credit reports, insurance documents, and what appeared to be surveillance photos spanning several months. At the top of the pile was a cover letter from FBI Special Agent Rodriguez, Dad's partner in the Financial Crimes Unit. Miss Hayes, the letter began, using my new married name in a way that still felt surreal. Your father has asked me to brief you on the investigation into your sister's financial activity. What started as suspected identity theft has expanded into a multi-jurisdictional case involving wire fraud, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. We need to schedule a formal interview with you as soon as possible upon your return. Devon looked up from the documents with the expression he got when analyzing complex tactical situations. Zara, this isn't just about your wedding dress. Look at these bank statements. He handed me a series of printouts showing financial activity over the past 8 months. Even without forensic accounting training, I could see the patterns that had caught Dad's attention. Regular deposits from sources I didn't recognize, followed by large cash withdrawals and purchases that far exceeded what someone unemployed should be able to afford. But it was the insurance documents that made my blood run cold. Somehow, Brooke had taken out a life insurance policy on me, listing herself as the beneficiary. The policy was dated 6 months ago, right around the time Dad first started noticing suspicious inquiries about my financial information. Devon, she took out life insurance on me, without my knowledge or consent. He moved beside me on the couch, his arm automatically going around my shoulders as he studied the documents. That's not just fraud, Zara. Combined with the other harassment and sabotage attempts, it suggests something much more serious. The implications were starting to sink in, and they were terrifying. This wasn't a jealous sister acting out over wedding attention. This was someone who'd been systematically planning something that would financially benefit from my death or disappearance. I called Dad immediately, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed his direct line at the FBI field office. Zara, thank God. Are you and Devon back safely? We're home, Dad. I'm looking at Agent Rodriguez's packet right now. What the hell is going on? There was a long pause before Dad answered, and when he spoke, his voice had the carefully controlled tone he used for delivering bad news to crime victims' family. While you were on your honeymoon, we executed a search warrant on Brooke's room and her vehicle. What we found goes far beyond family harassment. She's been running multiple identity theft schemes, using your personal information and military credentials to open fraudulent accounts and make false insurance claims. The life insurance policy is just the beginning. She's also filed false disability claims with the VA using your service record, applied for credit cards in your name, and even attempted to access your military death benefits by claiming you were missing in action during your deployment to Germany. The room started spinning slightly, and Devon immediately moved closer, his presence steadying me as Dad continued. The search warrant turned up detailed notes about your daily routines, copies of your military records, and what appears to be a timeline planning some kind of incident that would trigger the insurance payout. What kind of incident? I managed to ask, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. We're still analyzing everything, but there are references to accidents that would look natural but be fatal. Car crashes, hiking accidents, equipment failures during military training. She'd been researching methods for months. The magnitude of what Dad was telling me hit like a physical blow. My sister hadn't just been trying to ruin my wedding out of jealousy. She'd been planning to kill me for the insurance money. Devon took the phone from my shaking hand. Agent Caldwell, this is Lieutenant Hayes. What's our immediate security situation? Is Zara in active danger? Brooke was arrested yesterday morning at Mom's house. She's currently being held without bail on federal charges including conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and identity theft. The immediate physical threat is contained, but we need Zara to come in for a full debriefing as soon as possible. After Devon hung up, we sat in silence for several minutes, processing the reality of what we'd learned. The woman who'd tormented me throughout childhood, who'd stolen my wedding dress and tried to sabotage my ceremony, had also been planning to murder me for insurance money. I need to call Colonel Webb, I said finally. This is going to affect my security clearance, my career, everything. Devon nodded grimly. And I need to inform my chain of command. If there's been a credible threat against a military spouse, they need to be aware of the situation. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, official notifications, and the kind of administrative paperwork that accompanies any situation involving both military personnel and federal crime. Colonel Webb was supportive but thorough in her questions, making it clear that the Army would provide any assistance needed for the investigation, while ensuring that my professional reputation remained protected. Sergeant Hayes, she said, using my new married name with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. You're the victim of a serious federal crime. This will not negatively impact your security clearance or your career prospect. If anything, your professional handling of a family member's criminal behavior reflects well on your character and judgment. That afternoon, Devon and I drove to the Denver Federal Building for my formal interview with the FBI. The imposing concrete structure looked exactly like what it was, a fortress of federal law enforcement, built to intimidate criminals and reassure victims that justice would be served. Agent Rodriguez met us in the lobby, a small woman in her 40s with gray-streaked hair and the kind of steady presence that suggested she'd seen every possible variation of human betrayal. She escorted us to a conference room where Dad was waiting with several boxes of evidence and a digital recorder. Mrs. Hayes, I know this is difficult, but I need you to walk me through your relationship with your sister chronologically, starting from childhood. We're building a comprehensive case, and understanding the pattern of behavior is crucial. For the next 3 hours, I recounted 26 years of Brooke's manipulation, attention-seeking behavior, and gradual escalation into criminal activity. Agent Rodriguez took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting that I elaborate on specific incidents. What emerged from the interview was a clear pattern of antisocial behavior that had been dismissed by family members as normal sibling rivalry or attention-seeking dramatic. Brooke's theft of small amounts of money during high school, her lies about academic achievements and job prospects, her manipulation of family members against each other, all of it formed a progression toward more serious criminal behavior. The life insurance fraud appears to have been the end goal, Agent Rodriguez explained as we wrapped up the interview. Everything else, the wedding sabotage, the identity theft, the harassment, was designed to isolate you from family support, while gathering the information she needed to make the murder look accidental. Devon had remained quiet throughout most of the interview, but now he spoke up. Agent Rodriguez, what kind of sentence is she looking at? If convicted on all charges, she's facing 25 to 30 years in federal prison. The conspiracy to commit murder charge alone carries a potential life sentence. As we left the federal building that evening, I felt emotionally drained, but oddly relieved. For years I'd been told I was overreacting to Brooke's behavior, that I needed to be more understanding of her struggles, that families should forgive and forget. Now I had official validation that my instincts had been correct all along. The drive home was quiet, both of us processing the magnitude of what we'd learned. It was Devon who finally broke the silence. Zara, I need you to know that none of this changes how I see you or our marriage. If anything, it makes me admire your strength even more. You survived someone actively trying to destroy you, and you did it with grace and dignity. I just keep thinking about all the times I defended her to other people, all the times I made excuses for her behavior, or tried to minimize the damage she caused. That's what good people do when they love someone. The fact that she exploited your loyalty doesn't reflect poorly on you, it reflects poorly on her.
Your father tried to warn me that something serious was happening, but I didn't want to believe that one of my daughters could be capable of hurting the other one. I failed you, Zara. As a mother, I failed to protect you. Mom, you're not responsible for Brooke's choices. She's an adult who made deliberate decisions to commit crimes. That's on her, not on you. Over the following weeks, more details emerged about the scope of Brooke's criminal activities. The FBI had traced fraudulent accounts across 3 states, uncovered forged documents dating back 2 years, and discovered evidence of other potential victims among extended family members and former friends. Most disturbing was the discovery of detailed surveillance notes about my daily routines, my military training schedule, and even my preferred hiking trails in the Colorado mountains. She'd been watching me for months, looking for the perfect opportunity to stage an accident that would trigger the insurance payout. The wedding dress destruction had been a test run of sorts, a way to gauge how much chaos she could create before family members intervened. When Dad shut down her hotel performance so quickly and effectively, she'd apparently decided to accelerate her timeline for more serious action. If you hadn't gone on your honeymoon when you did, Agent Rodriguez explained during a follow-up meeting, we believe she would have attempted something within the next few weeks. The insurance policy had a 2-year waiting period for suicide clauses, but accidental death benefits were available immediately. The trial preparation process stretched over several months, during which Devon and I settled into married life while dealing with the ongoing stress of federal legal proceedings. Colonel Webb had arranged for me to work with the base counseling services, recognizing that processing attempted murder by a family member wasn't something most people handled alone. The counselor, Major Patricia Santos, was a clinical psychologist who specialized in helping military personnel deal with betrayal and trust issues. She helped me understand that my instinctive response to protect myself from Brooke's manipulation had been psychologically healthy, even when other family members criticized me for being too harsh or unforgiving. Survivors of long-term psychological abuse often develop excellent threat assessment skills, she explained during one of our sessions. Your ability to recognize that Brooke's behavior was escalating probably saved your life. Devon attended several couples counseling sessions with me, wanting to understand how Brooke's years of manipulation might affect our marriage and how he could best support me through the legal process. His steady presence and unwavering support became my anchor during the most difficult parts of the investigation. The trial itself was scheduled to begin in the spring, giving us time to adjust to the reality of our new life together, while preparing for the emotional challenge of testifying against my own sister. The prosecution team was confident they had overwhelming evidence for conviction, but they wanted to ensure that I was emotionally prepared for what would likely be an intense courtroom experience. During one of our preparation meetings, the lead prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, walked me through what to expect during cross-examination. The defense attorney is going to try to portray this as a family dispute that got out of hand, rather than a premeditated conspiracy to commit murder. They'll argue that your sister was mentally ill and that her actions were cries for help rather than serious threats. But the evidence shows months of planning and research. Exactly. That's why your testimony is so crucial. You can establish the pattern of escalating behavior that shows this wasn't a sudden mental health crisis, but a deliberate progression toward more serious crimes. As winter turned to spring and the trial date approached, I found myself feeling stronger and more confident than I had in years. The investigation had validated everything I'd instinctively known about Brooke's behavior,
and the support from Devon, my military community, and even my parents had helped me process the trauma of discovering how close I'd come to being murdered. One evening in March, as Devon and I were cooking dinner together in our small base apartment, I realized that I felt genuinely happy for the first time in months. The shadow of Brooke's threats was still there, but it no longer dominated my thoughts or shaped my daily decisions. "You know what's strange?" I said, chopping vegetables while Devon worked on the protein. "I feel guilty for being happy, like I should be more traumatized by everything that happened." "Why do you think that is?" "Because it feels wrong to thrive when your own sister is sitting in federal prison awaiting trial for trying to kill you. Shouldn't I be devastated? Shouldn't this have destroyed my ability to trust people?" Devon paused in his cooking to look at me directly. "Zara, you survived something that would have broken a lot of people. The fact that you're strong enough to build a life despite what happened doesn't make you callous. It makes you resilient." He was right, of course. The investigation had revealed that Brooke's criminal behavior extended far beyond her actions against me. She'd been running various fraudulent schemes for years, victimizing not just family members but strangers, employers, and even charitable organizations. I wasn't the cause of her criminal behavior. I was simply her most convenient target, because of our family relationship and my stable military income. Besides, Devon continued, your happiness isn't contingent on her action. You built a career, served your country, found love, and created a life worth living. She made choices that led to federal prison. Those are separate things. That night, as I was going through mail that had accumulated during our busy week, I found an envelope with no return address, postmarked from the federal detention center where Brooke was being held. For a moment I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity won out. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Brooke's handwriting, messier and more erratic than I remembered. "Zara, I know you probably hate me now, and I don't blame you. I never meant for things to go this far. I was just so angry all the time, watching you succeed at everything while I couldn't even keep a job. The insurance thing was just supposed to be a backup plan, in case something actually happened to you. I never would have really hurt you. You have to believe that. We're sisters. I love you even if I haven't been good at showing it. Can you find it in your heart to forgive me? Can you tell Mom and Dad that I'm sorry? I know I messed up, but we're still family. That has to count for something. Love, Brooke." I read the letter twice, feeling the familiar tug of guilt and obligation that Brooke had been using to manipulate me for years. Even from federal prison, facing decades of incarceration for attempting to murder me, she was still trying to rewrite the narrative to make herself the victim and me the person responsible for fixing the situation. Devon found me sitting at our kitchen table with the letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. "What does she say?" he asked gently. "She says she never would have really hurt me, that the insurance policy was just a backup plan. She wants me to tell Mom and Dad that she's sorry and that we're still family." Devon read the letter himself, his expression growing increasingly grim as he processed Brooke's words. "Zara, this is textbook manipulation. She's minimizing her actions, claiming her criminal behavior was somehow accidental, and putting the responsibility for family healing on you rather than taking accountability for attempted murder." I knew he was right, but the little girl inside me who'd once looked up to her big sister still wanted to believe that somewhere inside the woman who'd tried to kill me was the person who'd braided my hair and defended me from schoolyard bullies. "What should I do with this?" "Whatever feels right to you. But remember that forgiveness doesn't require you to put yourself in danger or to minimize what she did. You can forgive her for your own peace of mind without having a relationship with her." That weekend, I called Major Santos for an emergency counseling session to help process my feelings about Brooke's letter. She helped me understand that my emotional confusion was normal, and that I didn't need to make any immediate decisions about how to respond. "Family relationships are complicated, especially when they involve trauma," she explained. "Your sister spent years conditioning you to feel responsible for her emotional well-being and to minimize her harmful behavior. Those patterns don't disappear overnight just because you've learned the truth about her intentions." Over the following days, I found myself thinking constantly about the letter and what response, if any, I owed Brooke. Part of me wanted to write back, to try one more time to reach whatever part of her might still be capable of genuine remorse and change. But the larger part of me recognized that engaging with her manipulation would only perpetuate the unhealthy dynamic that had nearly gotten me killed. In the end, I decided to write a response letter, not to send to Brooke but to read aloud during my counseling session as a way of processing my feelings and establishing clear boundaries. "Dear Brooke," I wrote, "I received your letter and I want you to know that I've thought carefully about your request for forgiveness. I do forgive you, not because you deserve it, or because what you did was somehow understandable, but because holding on to anger would poison my own life. However, forgiveness doesn't mean trust, and it doesn't mean relationship. You made a deliberate choice to try to kill me for money. That choice has consequences that go beyond whatever jail time you serve. You will never be part of my life again. I hope you find genuine peace and healing during your incarceration, but that healing cannot and will not include me. I wish you well, but from a distance that keeps me safe. Goodbye, Zara. Reading the letter aloud felt like releasing a weight I'd been carrying for months. I wasn't responsible for Brooke's rehabilitation, her relationship with our parents, or her feelings about the consequences of her actions. My only responsibility was to protect myself and build a healthy life with the people who genuinely loved and supported me. A week later, I received another letter from the detention center, this one from Brooke's court-appointed attorney requesting that I consider testifying on her behalf during the sentencing phase of her trial. The attorney argued that my testimony about Brooke's childhood and family background might help the judge understand the factors that contributed to her criminal behavior. I discussed the request with Devon, with Major Santos, and finally with Dad in his capacity as both a federal agent and my father. The decision is entirely yours, Dad. The prosecution doesn't need your testimony to secure a conviction, and you have no legal obligation to help with her defense. But if you think it might provide some closure for you, or if you believe there are mitigating factors the court should consider, that's a valid choice too. After much consideration, I decided not to testify for the defense. While I could acknowledge that our childhood had been complicated, and that Brooke had struggled with mental health issues, I couldn't in good conscience argue for leniency when she'd spent months planning to murder me. The evidence showed premeditation, not impulsive action driven by temporary mental illness. The trial proceeded without my testimony for the defense, and the prosecution's case was as overwhelming as they'd predicted. The jury took less than 4 hours to return guilty verdicts on all charges: conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, identity theft, and insurance fraud. During the sentencing hearing, I did choose to give a victim impact statement, not to argue for any particular sentence, but to ensure that the court understood the full scope of how her actions had affected not just me but our entire family. Your Honor, I said, reading from prepared remarks while Devon sat in the gallery behind me, the defendant's actions didn't just threaten my physical safety. They violated the most fundamental trust that should exist between family members and caused lasting damage to relationships that took decades to build. While I've forgiven her for my own peace of mind, I believe accountability is necessary not just for justice but for the protection of other potential victims. Brooke received a sentence of 28 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. As the judge pronounced the sentence, I felt not satisfaction or revenge, but a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, and I was finally free to move forward without looking over my shoulder. As Devon and I left the courthouse that day, walking hand in hand into the bright Colorado sunshine, I realized that this chapter of my life was finally definitively closed. Brooke would spend the rest of her youth and most of her middle age in federal prison, while I would spend that same time building a career, a marriage, and hopefully a family with the man I love. The girl who'd once tried to minimize herself to avoid her sister's jealousy was gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth and refused to compromise her safety or happiness for anyone else's emotional comfort. The strongest thing I'd ever done wasn't surviving Brooke's attempts to destroy me. It was finally choosing to protect myself even when that protection meant accepting that my sister had become someone who wished me dead. 2 years after Brooke's conviction, I was promoted to staff sergeant and selected for a specialized logistics assignment at the Pentagon. The promotion came with increased responsibilities, a significant pay raise, and the kind of career recognition that would have seemed impossible during those dark months when my own sister was plotting my murder. Devon had also advanced in his career, earning his captain's bars and a coveted position with Air Force Space Command in Colorado Springs. We'd bought our first house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch near Peterson Space Force Base, complete with a 2-car garage and a backyard where we planned to eventually install a swing set for the children we hoped to have. Life had settled into the kind of comfortable routine that military families cherish between deployments: morning PT sessions, weekend barbecues with fellow service members, and quiet evenings planning our future together. But success, I'd learned, sometimes draws unwanted attention from people who'd rather tear down others' achievements than build their own. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a phone call from Mom on a Tuesday evening in September. Devon and I were assembling a bookshelf in our home office, debating whether the instructions were deliberately incomprehensible or just poorly translated, when my phone rang. "Zara, honey, I need to tell you something," and I want you to stay calm. Those words from any parent immediately trigger panic. But coming from Mom, who'd become almost pathologically careful about family communication since Brooke's conviction, they made my blood run cold. What's wrong, Mom? Brooke's been writing letters, not to us but to other people. Extended family members, some of your old school friends, even people from your military unit. She's been telling them a very different version of what happened during the trial. I sank into our half-assembled desk chair, feeling the familiar knot of dread forming in my stomach. What kind of different version? She's claiming that you and your father conspired to frame her for crimes she didn't commit because you were jealous of the attention she was getting from the family. She says the FBI case was fabricated and that she's serving time for being the victim of a vindictive sister who has law enforcement connections. Devon immediately moved closer, his hand finding my shoulder as he listened to my side of the conversation. His expression grew increasingly grim as I relayed Mom's words. Mom, please tell me that people aren't believing this. Most people aren't. Your Aunt Sarah called me immediately when she got a letter, and she was furious on your behalf. But Zara, some people are asking questions. Cousin Mike posted something on Facebook about how the justice system sometimes railroads innocent people, and it's pretty clear he's talking about Brooke's situation. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Mom detailing the scope of Brooke's letter-writing campaign and the various responses she'd received from family members and acquaintances. The pattern was predictable. People who knew me well dismissed Brooke's claims immediately, while those who'd had limited contact with our family or who'd always been skeptical of authority figures were willing to entertain the possibility that a federal conspiracy had been orchestrated to destroy an innocent woman. After I hung up, Devon and I sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the implications of what we'd learned. She's doing this from federal prison, I said finally. Even with 28 years to serve, even with overwhelming evidence of her guilt, she's still trying to destroy my reputation and relationships. It's what abusers do, Devon replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. When they can't physically harm their victims anymore, they find other ways to maintain control and cause damage. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the progress I'd made in healing from Brooke's betrayal. 2 years of counseling, career advancement, and building a healthy marriage had helped me move past the trauma of discovering that my sister had planned to kill me. I'd reached a place where I rarely thought about her, except when directly reminded, and I'd started to believe that chapter of my life was permanently closed. But Brooke's prison letters were a reminder that some people never stop trying to rewrite history in their favor, even when the facts are thoroughly documented in federal court records. The next morning, I called Major Santos to schedule an emergency counseling session. Even though I was no longer stationed at Fort Carson, she'd remained available for consultation when issues related to Brooke's case resurfaced. This is actually quite common, she explained during our video call. Incarcerated individuals often spend years crafting alternative narratives about their crimes, especially when they're serving lengthy sentences. The letters serve multiple psychological purposes. They help her maintain a sense of control, they provide attention and sympathy from people who don't know the full story, and they allow her to avoid taking responsibility for her actions. But what about the people who might believe? What about the damage to my reputation and relationships? That's where you have some choices to make. You can ignore the letters and trust that people who matter will see through her manipulation, or you can take proactive steps to address the false narrative she's spreading. The idea of having to defend myself against my sister's lies from prison felt exhausting and unfair. I'd already survived her attempts to murder me, testified in federal court, and rebuilt my life from the chaos she'd created. The fact that I now had to actively combat her efforts to rewrite history felt like being victimized all over again. But Major Santos helped me reframe the situation in terms that made sense for someone with my military background. Think of this as an information warfare campaign, she suggested. Your sister is using psychological operations tactics to undermine your credibility and relationships. You can either let her control the narrative, or you can mount an effective counter-campaign using the truth and documentation. That afternoon, I called Dad at his FBI office to discuss potential strategies for addressing Brooke's letter campaign. I've been expecting this, he said when I explained the situation. Prison correspondence is monitored, but inmates have First Amendment rights to communicate with people outside the facility. Unless she's threatening violence or committing new crimes through the mail, there's no legal mechanism to stop her from writing letters. So I just have to live with her spreading lies about me for the next 26 years? Not necessarily. You have options, but they require you to be strategic rather than react. Dad suggested that I create a comprehensive documentation package that could be shared with anyone who received one of Brooke's letters. The package would include key portions of the court transcripts, FBI evidence summaries, and sworn statements from witnesses who could corroborate the timeline of events. The goal isn't to convince people who are determined to believe her version, he explained. It's to provide factual information to people who genuinely want to understand what happened and make informed decisions about their relationships with both of you. Over the following weeks, Devon and I worked together to compile what we dubbed the Truth Package. It was a sobering exercise in documenting just how extensive Brooke's criminal activities had been, and how close I'd come to being murdered by someone who was supposed to love me. The package included photocopies of the fraudulent insurance policies she'd taken out on my life, screenshots of her internet searches about methods for staging accidental deaths, and excerpts from the handwritten journals she'd kept detailing her surveillance of my daily routine. We also included character reference letters from my commanding officers, testimony transcripts from other victims of her financial crimes, and expert analysis from FBI forensic accountants about the scope of her fraudulent activity. Reading through everything again was emotionally difficult, but it also reinforced my confidence that justice had been served appropriately. The evidence against Brooke hadn't been circumstantial or ambiguous. It had been overwhelming, detailed and corroborated by multiple independent sources. When we finished assembling the documentation, the package was nearly 50 pages long. It painted a clear picture of a woman who'd spent years escalating from minor manipulations to serious felonies, culminating in a premeditated conspiracy to murder her own sister for insurance money. "This is powerful stuff," Devon said as we reviewed the final version. "Anyone who reads through this and still believes she was framed would have to be ignoring facts in favor of conspiracy theory." I decided to take a proactive approach rather than waiting for people to contact me with questions. I created a private Facebook group called Caldwell Family Facts for Fiction, and invited extended family members, longtime friends and former military colleagues who might be targeted by Brooke's letter campaign. The group description was straightforward. "This is a resource for anyone who has received correspondence from Brooke Caldwell or has questions about the federal criminal case that resulted in her conviction. All information shared here is drawn from official court records and FBI investigation findings." Within the first week, 43 people had joined the group, and several shared that they'd already received letters from Brooke attempting to discredit the federal investigation. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive, with multiple family members and friends expressing outrage that she was continuing to victimize me even from prison. My cousin Jennifer, who'd served as a bridesmaid at my wedding, posted a lengthy message that captured the feelings of many group members. "I was there when Brooke destroyed Zara's wedding dress with bleach. I saw the FBI evidence with my own eyes. I watched Zara handle the most traumatic experience imaginable with grace and dignity. Anyone who believes Brooke's prison letters over documented federal court evidence is choosing fantasy over reality, but not everyone was convinced." Cousin Mike, who'd made the Facebook posts Mom had mentioned, sent me a private message that revealed how effectively Brooke's manipulation could work on people predisposed to distrust authority. "Zara, I've always thought something seemed fishy about Brooke's case. The FBI has a history of railroading innocent people, especially when they have personal connections to agents like your dad. Maybe Brooke did some petty stuff, but conspiracy to commit murder? That seems like a huge leap from wedding dress drama. Have you considered that maybe your dad's law enforcement buddies helped him get revenge on a daughter who embarrassed the family?" The message was frustrating because it demonstrated how conspiracy thinking could take isolated facts and weave them into alternative narratives that ignored overwhelming contradictory evidence. Mike wasn't stupid or inherently malicious. He was someone who'd been primed by years of media coverage about law enforcement, overreach to believe that federal agencies were capable of elaborate frame jobs. I spent considerable time crafting a response that addressed his concerns without being condescending or dismissive.
The request felt surreal. My personal trauma was apparently so well documented and representative of broader criminal patterns that it had academic value for training professionals to help other victims. Part of me felt exploited by the idea, but the rational part of my mind recognized that if sharing my experience could help other people recognize and escape similar situations, it was worth the discomfort. Devon and I discussed the request extensively before agreeing to participate. Foster assured us that all personal identifying information would be redacted from materials used in her courses, and that the focus would be on behavioral patterns and investigative techniques rather than sensationalizing family drama. This could actually be empowering, Devon pointed out. Instead of your experience being something that happened to you,
it becomes something that helps protect other people from similar predators. I agreed to participate in Dr. Foster's research, with the understanding that I would review all materials before they were used in any educational context. The process of working with her team to analyze Brooke's behavior patterns and criminal progression was surprisingly therapeutic. Instead of feeling like a victim of inexplicable betrayal, I began to understand myself as a survivor of well-documented criminal behavior that followed predictable patterns. Foster's analysis revealed several factors that had made me particularly vulnerable to Brooke's manipulation and targeting. As a military service member with steady income and comprehensive benefits, I represented a valuable financial target. My strong sense of family loyalty and tendency to minimize conflict made me less likely to report suspicious behavior early in the escalation process. And my professional reputation and security clearance created high stakes for any public scandal, making me more susceptible to threats and intimidation. Your sister's targeting of you wasn't random or purely emotional, Dr. Foster explained. She identified you as someone who had assets worth stealing and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The wedding sabotage and family manipulation were tactical moves designed to isolate you from support systems while gathering information for more serious crime. Understanding the calculated nature of Brooke's behavior helped me release the last remnants of guilt I'd been carrying about our fractured relationship. I'd spent years wondering if I could have been a more supportive sister, if I could have helped her address whatever underlying issues drove her behavior, if I'd somehow contributed to her criminal trajectory through my own actions or attitudes. Foster's research made it clear that predatory behavior within families follows patterns that are largely independent of the victim's choices or responses. Brooke would have targeted whatever family member represented the best combination of financial assets and exploitable vulnerabilities, regardless of how loving or supportive that person tried to be. Victims of family financial abuse often blame themselves for not recognizing the warning signs earlier or for trusting someone who ultimately betrayed them, Dr. Foster noted. But the reality is that family relationships are built on trust, and predators within families are uniquely positioned to exploit that trust because they have intimate knowledge of their victims' vulnerabilities and access to their personal information. The academic validation of my experience proved invaluable when dealing with the ongoing psychological impact of Brooke's letter campaign. Instead of second-guessing my perception of events or wondering if I'd been too harsh in my response to her manipulation, I had expert confirmation that my survival instincts had been accurate and appropriate. Around this time, I also received an unexpected opportunity that would define the next phase of my career. Colonel Webb, who'd been promoted to Brigadier General and was now working at the Pentagon, contacted me about a specialized position that would combine my logistics expertise with my unique experience as a victim of family financial crime. The Army is developing new protocols for protecting service members from financial exploitation by family members and romantic partners, she explained during a secure video call. Your case has become a reference point for understanding how these crimes can escalate and how early intervention might prevent more serious outcomes. We'd like you to help develop training programs and support resources. The position would involve traveling to military installations across the country to train commanders, chaplains, and family readiness group leaders about recognizing signs of financial abuse targeting service members. I would also work with legal assistance offices to develop better screening procedures for identifying soldiers who might be vulnerable to exploitation. This is a chance to turn your experience into expertise that could protect thousands of other military families, General Webb continued. It's also a significant career advancement opportunity that would position you well for future leadership roles. Devon was immediately enthusiastic about the opportunity. Zara, this is perfect. You get to help other people while advancing your own career, and it validates that surviving what Brooke did to you has given you unique qualifications that the Army valued. I accepted the position, which came with a promotion to Sergeant First Class and assignment to a joint task force based at the Pentagon. The work proved to be both challenging and deeply satisfying, combining my military expertise with hard-won personal knowledge about how financial predators operate within family systems. During my first year in the new role, I developed training materials that were implemented across all Army installations, conducted briefings for senior leadership about emerging threats to military family, and worked with federal law enforcement agencies to improve coordination between military and civilian authorities in cases involving financial crimes against service members. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brooke's attempts to destroy my life had ultimately created opportunities for career advancement and meaningful work that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Her criminal behavior had forced me to develop expertise in areas I'd never considered, given me credibility with victims and law enforcement that couldn't be taught in any classroom, and positioned me to make contributions to military readiness that few other people could make. But the most satisfying aspect of my new role was the direct impact on individual service members and their families. During base visits, I regularly met with soldiers who were dealing with financial exploitation by family members, romantic partners, or predatory businesses targeting military communities. One case that particularly resonated with me involved a young Marine whose older brother had been using his military ID and personal information to open fraudulent credit accounts. The Marine had discovered the fraud when he applied for a car loan and learned that his credit had been destroyed by thousands of dollars in unpaid debt he'd never incurred. "I don't understand how my own brother could do this to me," the Marine said during our counseling session. "We grew up in the same house, had the same parents, went to the same schools. How did we turn out so differently?" I shared parts of my own story with him, explaining how family predators often target the most successful and trustworthy members of their families precisely because those qualities make them valuable victims. I helped him understand that his brother's criminal behavior reflected problems with the brother's character and decision-making, not deficiencies in their family relationships or upbringing. "Your brother's choices don't reflect on you," I told him. "Your success and integrity made you a target, but they also give you the strength and resources to recover from his betrayal." Working with cases like this reinforced my understanding that family financial abuse was far more common than most people realize, and that military families were particularly vulnerable because of their stable incomes, comprehensive benefits, and frequent relocations that could isolate them from extended support networks. The training programs I developed began to show measurable results within 18 months of implementation. Reports of financial crimes against service members increased dramatically, not because the crimes were becoming more common but because military personnel were becoming better at recognizing and reporting them. Base legal assistance offices reported that early intervention was preventing many cases from escalating to the level of serious felony. Most importantly, exit surveys from my training sessions showed that service members felt more confident about protecting themselves and their families from financial exploitation. They were learning to recognize warning signs, establish appropriate boundaries with family members who showed concerning behavior, and access resources for help when problems did arise. As my third year in the Pentagon role began, I was selected for promotion to Master Sergeant and invited to present my research findings at the annual conference of the International Association of Financial Crimes Investigators. The presentation, titled Family Financial Abuse in Military Communities: Recognition, Prevention, and Response, drew an audience of over 400 law enforcement professionals from around the world. Standing at the podium in a conference center in Las Vegas, looking out at an audience of FBI agents, police detectives, military investigators, and academic researchers, I felt a profound sense of completion. The scared young woman who'd fled her sister's wedding sabotage and dress blues because her actual wedding dress had been destroyed was gone, replaced by a recognized expert whose experience had been transformed into expertise that could protect other people. During the question and answer session following my presentation, a detective from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police asked about the psychological impact of family financial abuse on victims and their recovery trajectory. In my experience, I replied, "The key to recovery is understanding that survival isn't just about getting through the trauma. It's about transforming that experience into something that serves a larger purpose." The criminals who target their own family members are counting on shame and isolation to keep their victims silent. When survivors speak up and share what they've learned, it breaks that cycle and creates protection for other potential victims. After the conference, Devon and I celebrated over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Strip, toasting both my professional recognition and our fourth wedding anniversary. As we watched the neon lights paint the desert sky in impossible colors, I reflected on how different my life had become from what I'd once imagined. I'd thought success would look like a perfect wedding, a stable marriage, and a predictable military career progression. Instead, it looked like surviving attempted murder by a family member, transforming trauma into expertise, and using that expertise to protect other people from similar predators. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if Brooke had been different? I asked Devon as we walked back to our hotel. Sometimes, he admitted, but then I think about all the people you've helped through your work, all the crimes that have been prevented because service members learned to recognize the warning signs you identify. If Brooke had been different, those people might still be vulnerable. He was right, of course. The work I was doing now wouldn't exist without the experience that had qualified me for it. Brooke's attempts to destroy me had ultimately created opportunities to help others that were more meaningful than anything I could have achieved through a conventional career path. As we reached our hotel room, I realized that I no longer thought about Brooke with anger or. Instead, I felt something closer to professional detachment, the way a doctor might think about a disease they'd successfully treated. She'd been a problem that required solution, a threat that required neutralization, a criminal whose behavior needed to be understood and documented for the protection of other potential victims. The sister I'd once loved was gone, replaced by a case study in family financial abuse that continued to provide valuable lessons for law enforcement professionals and potential victims. It wasn't the relationship I'd once hoped for, but it was the one that served the greater good. That night, as I fell asleep next to my husband of 4 years in a luxury hotel paid for by speaking fees from sharing my survival story, I felt something I'd never expected to feel about my experience with Brooke. Not gratitude for the trauma itself, but gratitude for the strength it had revealed, the expertise it had created, and the opportunities it had provided to make a meaningful difference in other people's lives. I'd been transformed from victim to victor to advocate, and that transformation had given my experience a purpose that extended far beyond my own healing. The scared young woman in the motel room, staring at a ceiling stain and wondering how her life had gone so wrong, could never have imagined that her darkest moment would ultimately become the foundation for her greatest achievement. 5 years had passed since I'd stood in that federal courthouse watching my sister receive a 28-year sentence for attempting to murder me. Now, on a crisp October morning in Washington, D.C., I was preparing for what would be the most significant presentation of my military career. The Secretary of Defense had personally requested a briefing on the family financial exploitation prevention program I'd developed, and the results were impressive enough to warrant consideration for implementation across all branches of the military. Devon had been promoted to major and was now working as a strategic planner for Space Force operations, while I'd advanced to sergeant major and was leading a team of 12 specialists, focused on protecting military families from various forms of financial predation. Our professional lives had flourished in ways that seemed almost impossible during those dark months when we'd been planning a wedding while my sister plotted my death. The briefing room in the Pentagon was filled with senior military leaders, congressional staffers, and representatives from federal law enforcement agencies. As I activated the presentation screen and looked out at the assembled officials, I felt the same calm confidence that had carried me through every challenge since that night I'd chosen to rebuild my life rather than remain a victim. Good morning. Over the past 4 years, the Family Financial Exploitation Prevention Program has directly assisted 2,847 military families, recovered over $1.3 million in stolen assets, and prevented an estimated $47 million in additional fraud through early intervention and education. The statistics represented real families whose lives had been saved from the kind of devastation Brooke had intended for mine. Behind each number was a story of someone who'd learned to recognize the warning signs, had found the courage to report suspicious behavior, or had received help before a bad situation became a catastrophic one. During the question period that followed my presentation, a congressional representative from Texas asked about the long-term psychological impact on victims of family financial abuse and whether the program addressed those aspects of recovery. Congresswoman Martinez, one of our most important findings is that victims of family financial crimes often experience more severe psychological trauma than victims of similar crimes committed by strangers. The betrayal of trust within family relationships can create lasting damage to a person's ability to form healthy relationships and make sound financial decisions. Our program includes comprehensive counseling resources and peer support networks to address these psychological dimensions. What I didn't mention during the formal briefing was how much of that understanding came from my own journey through trauma recovery and eventual transformation. The textbook knowledge I'd gained through training and education was valuable, but the lived experience of surviving family betrayal had given me insights that couldn't be taught in any classroom. After the briefing concluded successfully, with preliminary approval for program expansion across all military branches, I walked through the corridors of the Pentagon feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. The building that had once seemed impossibly intimidating when I first arrived as a newly promoted Sergeant First Class now felt like home, a place where my expertise was valued and my contributions were making a measurable difference. That evening, Devon and I celebrated at our favorite restaurant in Arlington, a small Italian place where the owner had learned our names and always saved us a corner table where we could talk privately about work challenges and personal dreams. As we raised our glasses to toast the successful briefing, Devon smiled with the kind of pride that comes from watching someone you love achieve something they'd worked years to accomplish. Zara, do you realize what you've built? 5 years ago, you were a logistics sergeant dealing with a family crisis. Now you're briefing the Secretary of Defense on a program that's protecting thousands of military families. That's not just career advancement, that's legacy creation. He was right though, the transformation had happened so gradually, that I sometimes lost sight of how dramatically my life had changed. The woman who'd once tried to minimize herself to avoid triggering her sister's jealousy was gone, replaced by someone who commanded respect in the highest levels of military leadership. But the most meaningful validation had come 6 months earlier, in a letter from someone I'd never met. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez had written to thank me for the training session I'd conducted at Fort Bragg, where she'd learned to recognize the financial exploitation she was experiencing from her ex-husband. "Ma'am, your presentation saved my military career and probably my life. My ex was using my deployment schedule to access my accounts and run up debt in my name, just like you described in your training. Without your program, I never would have understood that what was happening to me was a crime, not just a messy divorce. The legal assistance office helped me document everything, and now he's facing federal charges while I'm getting my financial life back on track. I wanted you to know that your work matters to people like me who didn't even know we needed help." Letters like Maria's arrived regularly now, from service members across all branches who'd been helped by the resources and training programs my team had developed. Each one reinforced my understanding that surviving Brooke's betrayal had prepared me for work that was larger and more important than anything I could have imagined during my darkest moments. The personal satisfaction of this work was matched by the professional recognition it had brought. I'd been selected for the Army's Advanced Strategic Leadership Program, which would prepare me for promotion to Command Sergeant Major and eventual assignment to Major Command position. The program included graduate-level coursework in organizational psychology, public policy, and strategic communications, all areas that built on the expertise I'd developed through my family exploitation prevention work. But perhaps the most unexpected development in my life had come 8 months earlier, when Devan and I learned that we were expecting our first child. The pregnancy had been planned and welcomed, but it had also forced me to confront questions about family, legacy, and the kind of parent I wanted to be given everything I'd experienced with Brooke. What if our child inherits whatever was wrong with Brooke? I'd asked Devan during one of our late-night conversations about the future. What if there's something genetic or environmental that creates that kind of predatory behavior? Devan had taken my hands in his and looked directly into my eyes with the kind of steady presence that had first attracted me to him years earlier. "Zara, you've spent 4 years studying family dysfunction and criminal behavior from every possible angle. You know better than anyone that Brooke's choices were her own, not the inevitable result of genetics or upbringing. Our child is going to grow up in a home where honesty, integrity, and service to others are the foundation of everything we do. That's the legacy we're creating." He was right, of course. My work had shown me that while some people might be more vulnerable to certain psychological pressures, criminal behavior was ultimately a matter of choice. Brooke had chosen to respond to her feelings of inadequacy and jealousy by targeting me for exploitation and eventual murder. She could have chosen therapy, education, career development, or any number of constructive responses to whatever underlying issues she was facing. The baby was due in February, and we'd decided not to learn the gender in advance, preferring to be surprised. What we did know was that our child would grow up in a world where their mother's expertise in protecting families from financial predation was helping to create safer communities for military families everywhere. As autumn turned to winter and my pregnancy progressed, I found myself reflecting often on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. The scared young bride, whose wedding dress had been destroyed by a jealous sister, had become a nationally recognized expert, whose work was shaping military policy at the highest levels. But the real transformation wasn't professional, it was personal. I'd learned to trust my own instincts about people and situations, to set firm boundaries even with family members, and to prioritize my own safety and well-being without guilt or apology. The people-pleasing tendencies that had made me vulnerable to Brooke's manipulation had been replaced by a clear understanding of my own worth and a refusal to compromise my values for anyone else's comfort. This personal growth became particularly evident during the holiday season, when Mom called to discuss Christmas plans and tentatively mentioned that she'd been corresponding with Brooke through the prison mail system. "She asks about you sometimes," Mom said carefully. "She wants to know if you're doing well, if you're happy. I think she regrets what happened, even if she's never been able to admit it directly." The conversation would have been devastating to the younger version of myself, the one who'd spent years trying to maintain family harmony at any cost. But the woman I'd become could hear Mom's words without feeling obligated to respond with forgiveness, reconciliation attempts, or emotional labor on Brooke's behalf. "Mom, I'm glad you're able to maintain whatever relationship feels right for you with Brooke. But I need you to understand that my boundaries around her are permanent. She spent months planning to murder me for insurance money. The fact that she failed doesn't create any obligation for me to participate in her rehabilitation or emotional healing. I know, honey. I wasn't suggesting that you I just thought you might want to know that she thinks about you. I appreciate you telling me, but it doesn't change anything for me. Brooke made choices that ended our relationship permanently. I've moved on, and I need our family to respect that boundary. The conversation ended cordially, but it reinforced my understanding that some family members would always hope for reconciliation scenarios that weren't realistic or healthy. My job wasn't to manage their feelings about my relationship with Brooke. It was to maintain the boundaries that kept me safe and allowed me to continue building the life I'd chosen. That Christmas was particularly meaningful because Devon and I were able to host both sets of parents at our home for the first time. The house filled with laughter, cooking smells, and the kind of multi-generational conversation that creates lasting memory. Dad spent hours telling Devon's father about his FBI cases, while Mom and Devon's mother compared notes on military life and the challenges of loving people whose careers involved frequent relocations and deployment. As I watched our families blend seamlessly around our dining room table, I felt profound gratitude for the relationships that had survived and strengthened during the most difficult period of my life. These were the people who'd stood by me during the investigation, who'd celebrated my professional achievements, and who were now excitedly preparing to welcome the next generation of our family. The baby arrived on February 14th, Valentine's Day, after 12 hours of labor that Devon endured with military stoicism and approximately 17 cups of hospital coffee. Eleanor Rose Hayes weighed 7 pounds, 3 ounces, and had her father's dark hair and what we hoped would be my stubborn determination to succeed despite obstacles. Holding my daughter for the first time, I felt a fierce protectiveness that went beyond anything I'd experienced before.
As Eleanor grew from a tiny infant to a curious toddler, she became the center of our family's universe while Devon and I continued advancing our respective careers. I was promoted to Command Sergeant Major and selected for assignment to U Army Training and Doctrine Command, where I would oversee the continued development and implementation of family protection programs across all Army training institutions. The promotion ceremony was held at Fort Leavenworth on a bright spring day, with Eleanor toddling around the parade ground in a miniature Army uniform while Devon chased after her with patient determination. As the commanding general pinned the new rank insignia on my uniform, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 7 years earlier, I'd been a sergeant whose sister had destroyed her wedding dress and tried to ruin her marriage ceremony. Now I was a command sergeant major whose expertise was shaping policy for an entire branch of the military, whose research was contributing to civilian law enforcement efforts, and whose daughter would grow up knowing that her mother had transformed personal trauma into professional achievement that protected thousands of other families. The formal promotion reception included colleagues from across my career, including Colonel Webb, now a Major General, who'd supported my advancement through every step of the process. During her congratulatory speech, she made a comment that captured something essential about the path I'd taken. Command Sergeant Major Hayes represents the best of military leadership, the ability to transform personal adversity into institutional strength. Her work protecting military families from financial exploitation has prevented countless tragedies and saved the careers of thousands of service members. But more importantly, she's demonstrated that surviving trauma and using that experience to help others is one of the highest forms of service. After the ceremony, as Devon and I were loading Eleanor into her car seat for the drive home, I received a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, my heart rate spiked as I wondered if Brooke had somehow managed to contact me directly from prison. Instead, the message was from Captain Jennifer Walsh, a Marine officer I'd never met. CSM Hayes, I attended your presentation at Quantico last month about family financial exploitation. Your training helped me recognize that my brother was stealing my identity to open credit accounts. I wanted to thank you for saving my career and probably my sanity. Officers like you are the reason people like me can serve with confidence. Messages like Jennifer's had become routine, arriving regularly from service members across all branches who'd been helped by the programs I'd developed. Each one reinforced my understanding that the work I was doing extended far beyond my own healing or professional advancement. It was about creating systemic changes that would protect future generations of military families from the kind of betrayal I'd survived. As we drove home from the promotion ceremony, with Eleanor babbling happily in her car seat and Devon planning a celebration dinner at our favorite restaurant, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful from the wreckage of personal trauma. Brooke was still serving her federal sentence, with at least 11 more years remaining before she'd be eligible for parole consideration. Her letters to family members had stopped several years earlier, either because she'd exhausted her audience or because she'd finally accepted that her version of events wasn't gaining traction with people who knew the documented fact. But her impact on my life had become entirely positive through the transformation process that had led to my current work,
The sister who'd tried to destroy me had inadvertently created the experiences and expertise that defined my most meaningful professional achievement. Eleanor would grow up knowing that her mother had survived attempted murder by a family member and had used that experience to protect other people from similar predators. She would learn that survival wasn't just about personal resilience, it was about transforming trauma into service that made the world safer for everyone. That night, as I tucked Eleanor into her crib and watched her drift off to sleep, I realized that my story with Brooke was finally completely finished. Not because she'd changed or because we'd achieved some kind of reconciliation, but because I'd extracted every possible lesson from the experience and used those lessons to create something larger than myself. The scared young woman who'd fled her family home with nothing but a backpack and wounded pride was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the strongest response to betrayal isn't revenge or even forgiveness. It's transformation, taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and turning it into the foundation for the best work you'll ever do. Eleanor stirred slightly in her sleep, and I whispered softly, "You're going to grow up knowing that Hayes women don't just survive. We thrive, we serve, and we protect other people from the darkness we've seen. That's your legacy, sweetheart. That's what we built from the ashes." As I turned off the nursery light and headed toward my own bedroom where Devon was waiting with congratulations on my promotion and plans for our future, I felt the deep peace that comes from knowing you've not just survived trauma, but transformed it into something that makes the world better for everyone who comes after you. The woman who'd once tried to make herself smaller to avoid her sister's jealousy had become someone whose expertise protected thousands of families, whose research was shaping national policy, and whose daughter would inherit not trauma but triumph. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy, it's becoming so successful, so helpful to others, and so genuinely happy that their attempts to harm you become irrelevant footnotes in a story about transformation, service, and the power of refusing to let other people's darkness define your light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.